Hello everyone, welcome to the 5th video on cursive lowercase letters. Today we will cover all the descender letters. Those are the letters with lower loops, and they can look very elegant if you make them on the correct proportion and consistent slant angle. To make a descender, first need to find the X height, and the descender follows the main slant all the way to the bottom before turning into an exit stroke. Pay attention to where the upstroke crosses the stem. The loop crosses the stem at approximately the baseline. The point of intersection is the same for all descender letters, and hopefully you can recognize it in other letters that will soon follow. Notice that the shape of the loop is not symmetric. It is shaped like a raindrop to lend an organic feel. If you add a dot at approximately 2/3 of a space above the X height, you get a lowercase j. Apparently, the dot should be positioned on the main slant. The downstroke follows a uniform heavy pressure until it is reaching the bottom. Just before it reaches the bottom, you should reduce the pressure to create the descender loop. If you've seen my earlier video, you should be able to recognize that the downstroke is heavy and the upstroke is light. Notice that the pressure doesn't change suddenly, and the speed is not constant. As you are reaching the bottom, you should reduce the speed as well as the pressure. Just like when you are driving a car, you need to slow down before making a U-turn, before you can speed up again. Pay attention to how my speed and pressure vary together. One common mistake is to turn the stem into a curve. This causes the letter to look wiggly and unnatural, even if it's positioned on the main slant. Also, be especially careful where the loop crosses the stem. If it crosses too early, this results in a very narrow loop. On the contrary, if you cross the stem too late, the loop may be too large. In addition to the intersection point, you should also pay attention to the width of the loop. If the width is too narrow, the letter will likely be too crampy. On the other hand, if the loop is too wide, it causes the letter to take too much space. And of course, the width of the loop depends on the upper part of the letter as well. And because lowercase j is a skinny letter, I'd like to keep the loop slightly narrower. Anyway, those are the points you should keep in mind when you practice descender letters, because they generally apply to all descender parts. The lowercase j has two parts. The first part is the same as the lowercase a, and the second part is just the regular descender. Both the close counter and the descender should be positioned on the main slant. And there's nothing surprising about the distribution of pressure. The first part is identical to that of lowercase a, and we just talk about how to write the descender part. So if you've been following my earlier videos, you should find it very easy. Many of the new letters are simply composed by reusing old components. One thing you should be careful with is not to make the counter too flat and pointy. On the other hand, it also doesn't look nice to make the counter too full and circular. Also, pay attention that the stem should not extend above the X height. Some people like to do it, and if you really want to do it, try to make it beautiful. And last but not least, the two parts should be completed in one single stroke. Because if you write it separately, the letter might be broken into two separate parts. And don't forget to avoid all the descender mistakes we just mentioned earlier. The descender should not be a spline, the crossing point should not be too early or too late. The width of the loop should not be too narrow or too wide. And because the upper part of lowercase g is wider than j's, I suggest that you make the descender slightly wider as well. The lowercase q is a special case because its descender doesn't have to cross the stem, and when it does cross the stem, I found it easier to connect to other letters. In both cases, both the counter and the descender should be positioned on the main slant. And the pressure variation follows the same pattern. Before you reach the bottom line, you should reduce both the speed and the pressure. Just like in regular descender, the stem is a stem and should not be turned into a curve. One subtle point to pay attention to is that the exit stroke should not be separated too far. This will result in a triangular shape instead of a slender vertical form. Also, pay attention that the turning points should be smooth. By the way, in an easier variation, you can actually ignore the descender and finish the letter with a stem. I often use this form when I'm taking class notes because it helps me write quickly. The lowercase y is an easy one. The first part is identical to lowercase u, and the second part is just replaced by a regular descender. Everything has been covered before. Just pay attention that both the short stem and the long stem should follow the main slant. Similarly, the heavy pressure is distributed on both the short stem and the long stem, while the entry stroke and the exit stroke are light pressured. And hopefully you have remembered all the key points about the descender. The stem should be straight, and the crossing point should not happen too early or too late, and the width of the loop should not be too wide or too narrow. Similar to lowercase q, the lowercase y has a simpler form, where you can just ignore the descender loop. This variation is much easier, and it helps me a lot when I need to write fast. Just don't do it on lowercase g or j. Give it a try, and you will understand why. The lowercase z is probably the most difficult letter today, because it doesn't have a stem, and everything is a curve. It has two strokes, and every stroke can be considered as part of an oval. What makes it even more difficult is that every curve follows the same slant. The distribution of pressure follows the same pattern. The two downward strokes follow heavy pressure, while the entry and the exit strokes follow light pressure. As I mentioned earlier, both curves should follow the same slant. This is very important, because if they follow separate slants, even if the slant angles are correct, the letter still breaks down like a disaster. For comparison, you can see how the letter gets destroyed completely when the slants diverge. Another thing to pay attention to is that the entry and the exit strokes should be approximately parallel, otherwise the letter may look like a triangle. By now you have learned every descender letter from the alphabet. Before you start practicing, make sure you do at least 5 minutes of muscular movement exercise, which can help warm up your hand and get the most out of your practice session. If you find this video helpful, please support my channel, like this video, and subscribe for more original content. If you have any question, feel free to ask in the comment section below. I'll try to answer all questions personally. In the next video, we will study all the ascender letters and finish all the remaining lowercase letters in the cursive alphabet.